Alrighty, everybody. Well, let's just kick this episode off. What's up, everybody? This is Jimmy, back at you with another episode of Combat and Cryptids. So, I just lost my complete train of thought. Oh, yeah. So I know this is obviously Tuesday, 12/6, so it's Tuesday, which I kind of like the Tuesday streams a lot, or recordings a lot better, just because my wife works on this day, and it really, she works kind of all day, so she gets off at 8, so it just kind of helps the whole thing, because then I can just kind of worry about this for the evening and not have to deal with, like the family and all that stuff, and just kind of doing that thing. The kids, they can pretty much fend and feed for themselves, so it's not really that big of a deal. So I think I'm going to start. I know it's probably, I'm like saying like Thursday, and then I want to do it on Friday, and then work comes up and stuff like that. But I'm just trying to figure out like what works best for me, and what kind of, what schedule is going to work out the best for this, because I like talking about different kind of subjects, and all these kinds of different things, and I kind of just get ideas throughout the week and stuff like that. So by the time Thursday comes around, if I don't really have anything, or if I don't hear anything, or if I don't want to know what I want to talk about, I think the Tuesday kind of really works the best for me. We'll see. We'll see how everything kind of plays out. We'll just kind of play it by ear, I guess. I'm gonna try and shoot for like here on out, just doing it the remainder time on a Tuesday, because like the schedule works out a lot better. Now, actually, on about this episode, I think the biggest thing that I want to talk about on this one is aliens. That's probably everybody, everyone that I've met or have talked to have really. They're always, you talk about like the Bigfoot stuff, or you talk about like Dog Man or whatever, anything else besides like that's just like a one-off like weird thing. Most people aren't really, they really just don't want to admit that, hey, like those things are real. But when you throw out aliens, oh yeah, there's got to be other kinds of life forms out there. Everyone's initial reaction to that conversation, I guess, is more receptive, and they're more like, yeah, like that's more of a possibility, that something could be more, that's more realistic than something on Earth that's like, hey, like this is not real. So we'll just kind of go. I heard a couple. There was this. Hold on, let me look for it real quick. So there was this podcast that played this one guy, and he was a counterintelligence officer with Area 51, and he told these two stories about these two families that he investigated, and they were fucking insane. Like they were just like when you hear these stories, you're like, oh my god, like you like it's just really hard to fathom these kinds of things, because you think like the government and stuff like that, like some people already know how shady they are and how they can be and stuff like that, and to be these kind of people who are like the first up and comers as far as like conspiracies, like this is where it all started. Like these the whole Area 51, when everything got started with that whole Air Force base, everything from there kind of just stemmed from there, because it always seemed like the government was trying to hide things. Not, I'm not trying to be like, hey, like I'm not, hey, the government's listening to us and they're recording everything, because like I'm one little tiny little tadpole in this massive pond of everything else going on. So I know it's not anything like that. Or at least I don't worry about it like that. But there's a guy by the name of Richard Doty, and he did a presentation on like his assignment as a counterintelligence officer at Area 51. And this all happened from about the 1980s to about 1985. So a little bit before I was born, but it's just really interesting to hear. And most of this stuff's already been declassified, and they've already talked about it and stuff like that. So he's able to disclose and talk about these things. But the biggest things for me, as far as the takeaway from this, is at the first point in when all of these things started happening. So when all these, alien encounters, or they're seeing UFOs or whatever it is, everybody always seemed to, they always just wanted to seem like hey, this is how we have to cover it up, and this is what is going to happen. This is like everyone already had their predetermined stories for all these different scenarios. So if they saw an alien spaceship, if two fighter pilots saw an alien spaceship and they were really, that's really what they saw, and they're bringing it up on like comm chatter and stuff like that. It was really easy for people to hide those things, or not really hide those things, but to be like, hey, that's not what you saw. And just hearing everybody's different accounts and just listening to different people talk about these things, it really throws you for a loop when you're like, hey, like how if 10 people tell you that you didn't see something and one person said they saw something, it's really easy to discount what they saw, because it's very easy to be like, hey, like maybe I didn't see that, or maybe I was hallucinating, or there's always the person who goes through these kind of events and talks about these different things. It's really easy for them to change their story or change the subject matter of like, hey, like maybe this is not what I saw, and just really, and it's no fault of the government. That's their way of just trying to cover things up, which is cool. I mean, you guys do whatever it is you want to do, or talk about whatever it is you want to talk about, but the crazy thing is just how easily they discount people's stories, or they try and poke holes in them. Like, hey, like, well, 1 week ago you said that you saw two aliens. Now you're saying you saw three. Well, motherfucker, 1 week ago I wasn't freaking out because I saw aliens. Maybe you're like, the more you take time to think about something and process something, it's a lot easier to be like, hey, like, this is what I really saw. Once your brain kind of settles and kind of goes through its like traumatic event. Oh my god, that fucking dog. So I tried to bring my dog in here, and he's a little shithead. All right, so I brought him in here, and there's a bunch of stuff in here. You know, you got my wife's plants, you got the camera, you got the lights, you got the Christmas tree and everything. And this dude just runs a ruckus down it. I got cords everywhere and stuff like that. So it's like, before I even started this, I'm like, dude, you can't be in there. Like, I tried to give him a chance. Like, hey, I brought you toys in, I brought you some treats. Like, just sit down and relax, bro. But he didn't want to. So I'm like, well, you're fucking out of here. Like, I can't. And now he's just whining in his cage because he's got to sit out there because he doesn't like the kids, which is understandable. I mean, those kids are they're pretty gnarly to deal with, so. But yeah, anyway, so what I got out of the of Doty's his declassified stuff that he talks about and all these events that he basically started, like, it's cool to hear the stories of what he kind of investigated and stuff like that. But the biggest takeaway for me was they already had, and I mean, he tries to make it sound like he played it off like, hey, like, this is not, I didn't know this, or I didn't know. Get the fuck out of here, dude. Like, we were at one point in time part of the government as well. I was in the Marine Corps, so I get it. Like, it's not like, but don't play like, hey, I didn't know. Like, motherfucker, I knew, but I'm following what people above me are saying. That's all you have to go off of. And if they say, hey, like, if I was 18 and you came up to me and you said, hey, I want you to go to every single person's door and I want you to take all their guns and bring them all back to me. Me being 18 in the Marine Corps and just new to this and listening, and they brainwash you to be this like you're basically do what we say and that is it. 100% I would have did that. No doubt about it. It would not have made a difference whether it was on U.S. soil, foreign country, whatever. It didn't make a difference, because you can tell, like, that's the way the government kind of brainwashes that and puts you in those kind of scenarios. Like, you do what you're told and you ask questions about it later. So obviously he did what he was told at the point in time, and then you kind of ask the questions later, like, hey, why the fuck did we do that? Or why was this happen? Or why did these scenarios come up and this was our answer? And you kind of start trying to, like, poke holes through every kind of scenario. So the two stories that he goes over, the first one, the first account that he had, or the first investigation he had to go through, was in 1982 is when it happened. And basically there was this family of four. So there's a husband and there's a wife. And I have the whole, like, printout, readout and stuff like that, but I feel like it's kind of boring. Like, even if this podcast ends up being like 30, 45 minutes, at least it's not just me reading off of this fucking paper. But I kind of read it enough now to kind of know, like, hey, this is how I'm going to put it in my own words. and then just see how long it is. I mean, I have some other ad lib stories and stuff that I can go through, but these are the kind of the big points is about these two. He's a counterintelligence officer. He works for Area 51. Well, it wasn't called Area 51 at the time. It was called Nellis Air Force Base. And he basically, so the first investigation is this family of four, and they're basically in Nevada, and they're going on the main highway through Nevada, which they're getting close to where what is now known as Area 51. So the Air Force Base is where it's at, and they're getting there, and it's a husband, a wife, two kids, one daughter, one son, and the daughter I think is 8 years old, and the son is 5. So obviously that age group right there, it's not really you're not really going to get many details out of that. You're not going to be able to talk to these kids and have like full conversations with them. So basically they're driving down the highway, and it's like 3 or 4 in the morning or something like that. It's really they were heading to go somewhere, so they want to get an early jump and basically leave and go do all this stuff, and they wanted to get onto the highway before everybody else goes on. It's pretty much what everyone else does. So it's pretty normal, pretty common to do that kind of thing. It's not like a weird time. They're like, hey, at 11 p.m. we're gonna get up and go. No, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning. They just start driving, and they're like old station wagon. So they start driving, and they get to a point and in the highway where there's a bridge, and at the bridge, the wife notices that there's this really big there's a really big object like a little bit past the bridge, and it's kind of moving with them as they're driving, and she kind of notices it and kind of tells her husband about it. She's like, hey, like, do you see that? And he's like, yeah, of course I see it. It's just like it was just like a weird beam of light and like a saucer. Obviously looks like a UFO, and it's basically traveling with them as they're driving down the road. And obviously at 4 o'clock in the morning, there's not going to be much traffic. You're not going to have rush hour traffic and stuff like that. So they're like, oh man, everybody tries to disclaim it as, hey, this is what it is, or you try and rationalize, I guess, what you think it is, from things that you've seen in the past. And so they're like, oh, it's probably this or it's probably that. Well, this thing just keeps, like, it just moves, just the way the fluidity of it just moves completely different than, like, a vehicle. Like, most vehicles, when they drive, they have two taillights, and they kind of swerve a little bit. Like, I don't care how good of a driver you are, you have to swerve a little bit. You can't keep it straight all the way, and that was the odd thing about it. And so they basically get to a point where this UFO starts to get a little closer to them every single time. It just starts inching in and inching in, and at one point they lose it because it's above them. Now, obviously, you're trying to, like, having a family and stuff like that, being in this kind of scenario, you try and keep as calm as best as you can, and that's what he tried to do. He tried to keep calm, like, hey, it's nothing crazy, like, everything's good, like, nothing, like, the kids aren't freaking out yet at this point or anything like that. So, oh my God, that was insane. Jesus Christ, that hurt so much. So basically, at one point, he's starting to slow down because the UFO is getting closer, and at that point, he gets over them, and their car turns into, like, or at least this is what, like, secondhand explanation. Like, this is what they were explaining happened. And basically, the roof of their station wagon is basically turning into like a goo. Like, it's melting. Whatever's above them is melting the roof of their car, but it's not hot or anything like that. It's not heating up them, and they're like, "Oh my God, we're burning. We gotta get out." But it was just weird. Like, the roof of their car is just changing into like a different, like a spongy material, which is obviously odd because that should not happen. So at some point he tries to turn off on like a little side road, and he turns off onto a little side road, and from there he stops, and they get out of the car, and then from there it just kind of becomes a blur for them, I guess, is really the big thing. Is they're basically, once they get out of the car, kind of time slows down, and everything just slows down really, really slow. And they basically go from that point, from getting out of the car, they basically are like paralyzed, and they can't move, they can't speak, they can see, and they can hear, and they can, like, all the surroundings, everything is working, but they can't move like how you normally would think that you could move. And basically from there, they're all out of the car. So wife, husband, two kids, both 8 and 5, and from there, the UFO that was following them and was over them basically landed in the field, probably like within like 50 meters of them. And it lands into the field. The door opens up, which I thought was weird. I'm like, oh man, they have like suicide doors, or these just like regular doors, or what kind of doors are we talking about here? Like, is it like a sliding door, like you look like in Men in Black, where it comes down like that, or is it just like I'm always like the details, like the weird things, like, are they left-handed? Do they have pants on? Like, these just kind of weird things that just come up in my head. But basically, they're paralyzed, so they can see everything going on. They can feel the situations going on, but they can't do anything about it. And then basically from there, the UFO lands, everything opens up, and then out of the UFO comes two, and how they described it was basically two little green men who basically were approaching them, and they could hear what they were saying, but it's not like a normal conversation. Like me and you talking here, listening, all this stuff. This is just like normal conversation. It was more of like a AI, so more of like a computer generated software. So if you like talk like hey Siri type stuff like that. Oh jeez, my phone. Didn't mean to do that. So that kind of a voice is what they hear. So it's not obviously not normal and stuff. So they're really just like, and all they're doing is just seeing all this. They can't do anything. They can't move or anything like that. And then basically from there, the aliens come up. They leave the parents paralyzed, and they take the kid, who are 5 and 8. They basically take them, and they pick the kids up without even touching them. They're like floating, and they pick them up, and they basically like push their hand, and they move, and they float back into the spaceship. Both these kids. I mean, obviously this is terrifying for anybody who's a parent. This would be the most like, I don't care if you made it up. This story is like your worst nightmare of what could happen, because you can't do anything. All you can do is see what is going on. So basically, these two aliens, they pick up the kids because they were very interested in the kids. They said in their investigation and their report and everything. The weird part was they were very interested in the kids was the big thing. They obviously didn't care about the adults and stuff like that, because I don't know. I guess the adults in that situation, they're probably thinking like these guys are dumb or whatever. Or they're underdeveloped, or at that point in time, like, as you get older, you'll lose things like brain cells and all that stuff. So maybe this is like prime time for you to like figure out what the human body does and what the human race. I don't know. This is all just speculation for me. But basically, they take these kids and they put them back in the spaceship, and the spaceship takes off, flies away, gone, like out of sight, out of mind. And then 10 minutes later, the parents can obviously they get their feeling back. They can kind of feel, and they can kind of move, and they get up and stuff like that. And obviously they're thinking like, there's no way this has got to be a night. This has got to be a dream. There's no way you can just, like, what we witnessed and what happened could not have happened. And I wouldn't blame them at this point. Like, you're in the 1980s, early 80s, mid 80s. Like, these things are unheard of. Like, there's not all this special technology and all this stuff. I mean, things are coming up to the point where it's not, there's no technology up to this point where you can be like, hey, yeah, this is legitimate and this is what happened. So obviously they do what any parents would do. They get into the car. Obviously, for me, I probably would have stayed out there and searched for like hours and tried to look for them. Maybe something happened where we all had like, I don't know, something happened where you maybe misplaced them. Like misplaced them, like your keys or something. But maybe like I would have spent a little more time. But obviously these parents didn't. They eventually they get all their motor skills back, and they get into the car, and they drive. What the first thing you do is obviously drive to the police station. So they drive to the police station, and basically the Air Force base is probably, I think, like 10 miles away. And they drive to the sheriff's station, and they go there, and they write the report, and basically everyone comes, and everybody's like, what are these guys smoking? Like, what did they do with their kids? At this point, you're thinking like they murdered their kids, or they lost their kids, like, like normal things you would think. Like there's no way their kids got abducted by aliens, because at this point there's not too many accounts or reports about this stuff. So basically, they take down the reports, and then obviously they contact the military bases right there, and that's when that's when everybody just kind of comes together, and that's when Richard Doty, at this point in time, he is one of the investigating officers. He comes there and he listens to their story, and he writes everything down. He documents everything, and he doesn't make it seem like he doesn't make it seem like that he doesn't care. Like he's very like, oh yeah, like I understand. Like he doesn't make it seem like they're crazy. Like obviously the police station stuff like that, they're gonna be like, what are you guys smoking? Like this is not normal. Which is, I mean, that's if you called 911 right now and you were just like, hey, like something just snatched up both my kids and I don't know where they are, they're probably gonna come out and investigate you more than they're gonna investigate what the scenario, the situation is, which is pretty normal. So basically, they take their story and everything like that, and within the next day, within the next day, I think it was within 24 hours, the parents are obviously, I mean, they're probably losing their minds at this point. They're trying to rationalize and make up like think of like the whole scenario and the way everything went. Like, were we in a field? Were there really aliens? Did they get snatched up? Like all these kinds of things. Like thinking maybe at some point you blacked out, maybe. Um, And obviously, so Richard Doty takes her statements and everything like that, and basically tells them to stay at a hotel nearby, and basically doesn't discount any of it. He just doesn't have any information to say like, well, if this is true and aliens did take your kids, there's not really much they can do about it, which is the truth. I mean, unfortunately, it is the truth. There's not much, like, you can't expect them to be like, hey, like, we can take care of this and we will get it back. We'll jump in our spaceships and we'll just go. Like, no. No, you didn't have like an air tag in your backpack that's going to show you where you are. Um, so basically, that was the end of it. And then on the actual Air Force base, like the next day, within the next day, one of the guys who's on perimeter duty, who's basically just driving around, making sure nobody's jumping the fences or cutting fences and stuff like that, just basically on security duty, starts driving around the next day, and out of nowhere, he sees two kids just walking down the road. Um, so he drives, obviously pulls up to them. There's two kids. They are 8 and 5, and they are the parents. They are the kids of the parents that just made the report yesterday. So here are these random kids on a military base, probably about 6 miles. Like, I don't give a shit what kind of 8-year-old and 5-year-old you have. You tell any kid to walk 6 miles, like they're gonna be like, no, like you're high, dude. Like I know my kids ain't gonna do that. They're gonna be like, nah, it's too much walking, bro. Just put me in the car. So it was just very odd how the parents are like, hey, this happened, and our kids are missing, and then within the next day the kids show back up unharmed, besides being like maybe a little dehydrated. They were unharmed and just walking on the Air Force base. It's like they didn't sneak through the wire, they didn't jump a fence or anything like that. They just randomly showed up. So obviously Richard Doty and his team, they get called back out again, for these kids, and basically everybody gets reunited and stuff like that. And then they start asking the kids. They're like basically like, hey, what happened? Like what happened? And obviously the 5-year-old's not really going to be able to depict or talk about too much. I mean, he did have some odd accounts, like they weren't just, um, but he just wasn't making sense, I guess. So the whole account and the scenario that happened with him with the 5-year-old is not just not, doesn't make sense. Kids at that point in time, kids only have like a short attention span. It's not, you have to keep them very entertained if you're gonna hold their attention for that long. So they really didn't get much information out of her. With the 8-year-old, they got a lot of information out of her because she can talk a little bit better and she can articulate what's going on and stuff like that. So they basically start asking all these questions like, hey, did this happen? And of course she tells you like, hey, this is really what happened. And they've obviously been separated, so there's no way you could make up this story. Like there's no way you're gonna get an 8-year-old who basically just got snatched up and abducted. There's no way you're gonna be able to change that story or that scenario. She's gonna stick with that story because that is what legit happened to her. So basically, she recounts it as, so the aliens, obviously, they lifted her and her brother up. They take her on the spaceship. They go up in the air and they fly and zoom around and do all this stuff. and they didn't do anything to them. Obviously, they didn't harm them. They didn't do anything like that. They made them take these pills that basically, because obviously before this, like once all the meds and everything wear off or whatever they were doing to them, these kids are freaking out. These kids are they're crying. They're going crazy. They want their parents. They're screaming for their parents, stuff like that. So they basically gave them this medicine. This is what the little girl said. They basically gave her some medicine that basically just took the edge off and just kind of chilled them out. So then they stopped crying. Maybe they'd be more a little cooperative, and then you can actually get what you need out of them. They didn't find anything. They found like one anomaly in their system that said, hey, that they had taken something, but they didn't know what it was, or they didn't understand, like, hey, like, I have no idea what this element is that was in these kids' body, but it was nothing that harmed them. Obviously, it was nothing that did anything crazy to them. So, but basically, when the girl was talking, when the girl was talking to the aliens and stuff like that, what she recounted was it really sounded like that Siri voice. Like it was more robotic and more machine like. It wasn't like just two people having a conversation. It was a very robotic voice, which is the one thing that she recounted, like, more than anything, is like it wasn't they weren't people, like 100% they were not people. And basically one of the aliens showed like a map of like star constellations, and basically showed like where they were, and basically pointed to a star constellation where they were, and basically pointed at her, and then pointed back down to the ground to, I'm assuming, basically say like, hey, this is you, and this is where you're from, and this is where we're at. And then basically pointed to another galaxy, obviously far the fuck away from Earth and out of the Milky Way and stuff like that, and basically pointed to that constellation and pointed to himself, like, hey, this is where I'm from. So obviously, I mean, you can take that for what it's worth, but I mean, why? The biggest thing for that was like, are we saying that, hey, we're not alone? Obviously, I mean, if all these things are being declassified and talk about this stuff, like, you have no reason to make these things up. So why would you bring them or make them up? That's the big thing. Is if there are aliens or there are different, and I mean, they have. I think in that presentation that he gave, he basically said there are 7 different alien life forms that the U.S. has confirmed as, hey, we've met these people. Obviously, people think there's thousands of other ones and all these different ones. I mean, you can't. If you see like how big the galaxy is and how big like all of this is, like, you're saying we were the only chemical equation that made people and made this whole living thing. No, I can't. You can't sit here and tell me that. Like, it'd be a hard thing to sell, to be like, yes, you are the only thing in billions upon millions and billions of life forms and galaxies and star clusters, all this, that we're the only type of people in this. Like, no. It's just maybe, like, my theory on it is maybe we're just the only ones. Like, maybe there's other ones that are the same way, but we still have, like, no one has reached that point where we're like, hey, like, we are able to do this, and we're able to travel light years away in a matter of months or years or anything like that. Maybe that's it. Or maybe they are far more advanced than us, and they think that we're just fucking dumb. Like, maybe that's it. Maybe they just think, like, hey, they got to us. And they were like, Jesus Christ, these guys only got maybe 1,000 more years before they just do themselves in. Which, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, 1,000 years seems like a lot. Like, as far as, like, I'm 30 too, and 1,000 years is a long time. But in the overall grand scheme of Earth and the galaxies, like, that's not a lot. That's a very short amount of time. So maybe they're thinking like, hey, we don't got to talk to these guys because in 1,000 years, this is all gonna be gone. So it's not gonna really matter. So we could help them. Maybe, I don't know. Like, maybe that's their thought process of how they're gonna go about this, or what they think about it. But me and my wife talk about this a lot. I mean, we do, because we feel like when you we do this when we go out and we like have like a campfire and stuff like that. We stare at the sky. 80% of the time, we're just staring at the sky, especially on a clear night. You know, the stars are out. You know, the fire's going. Everybody's just like chilling and stuff like that. It's very easy to get locked into those kind of things and just kind of get on that subject where you're like, hey man, there's no way we could be the only ones, right? There's no way, because being that and seeing the different, like all these stars you're saying from the sky, and we're the only people, the only kind of style, the only thing like this that can. There's it's just beyond words to think like, hey, like this is, you guys are it. Like me, this is the highest form of life form out there. Like there's no way. Like there's no way. But that's probably the craziest, like as far as like whatever your opinion is or whatever you think about it and stuff like that. And I've talked to my dad about these things and stuff like that, and he's got some pretty interesting things. He used to work at the orange groves in Florida. He used to work night shift. He used to be out there all hours of the night and stuff like that, and he was always talking about these things. He would see things that he couldn't explain, and he would talk about things that he couldn't explain. And at that point in time, we were just really like, yeah, all right, Dad, like that's just got to be like sleep deprivation of some sort. But when you start to research and like look up these accounts and stuff like that, like a lot of this stuff is crazy. A lot of these different scenarios are, these fighter pilots or these telescopes that are just looking off into nothing. It's very hard to discount these kinds of things just because it's just like Bigfoot and stuff. Like people will 100% believe that we have aliens before they have Bigfoot, which is beyond crazy for me, because we always see, as far as aliens, is just fucking spinning little lights and triangles and stuff in the sky. But there's so many accounts of like Bigfoot and encounters, like actual encounters, like not seeing like, oh my god, that's a circle in the sky, like shit like that. Like what people in the woods are seeing, like that's a fucking person. Like that's the difference. But people will discount the Bigfoot and be like, that shit ain't real, and then be like, hey, aliens are real. You're like, what? How does that make sense? So basically, yeah. So that's the first kind of story right there. Which Richard Doty, if you look him up and stuff like that, he's really. Everybody think this guy's a whack job. They always think like everybody tries to discount and say like, hey, you're lying about this, you're lying about that. Like the guy doesn't have much to gain. He's fucking old. And at this point, like, why wouldn't you let him try and talk about as much as he can? Like, that's the thing that irritates me the most. Is, that time frame. It was very unheard of to talk about these things. It was very unheard of to speak of these things for fear of how people will look at you, or how people will. They'll say, "Hey, you sound like this," or "You sound like a crazy person." Or, "You sound like it just amazes me." So it makes me wonder, basically, how many people died who had these kind of scenarios or had these things happen to them, that just took it to the grave with them because they didn't want to talk about it, because for fear of how people will judge them. In today's society, it's very common and very easy to be like, hey, like this is okay. Like, talk about it. Like, it's cool. Like, I might think you're a little weird, but I'm gonna listen. Which is what you want, which is what you need. People inside their own minds, they make up weird shit. So to talk about those things, if you talk about it enough, maybe it doesn't sound so weird. And maybe you find holes in your own story. Then maybe you can discount it for yourself, or maybe people can ask you more questions to make you think of other things that maybe you didn't think of. Things like that. So this is why I like listening to all these different things. I like talking about all these different things, because every single person that I've talked to about this, and I'm talking, with the neighbor across the street, or with a coworker at work, or with some random person you just meet, like at like a restaurant or something like that. Like everybody has their own ideas and their own thoughts to whether it be aliens, or whether it be Bigfoot, ghosts, whatever it is. Like everybody has their own thought process and psyche, which is cool. And you can be for it, you can be against it. It doesn't make a difference. But I like to know the why. Why are you for it or why are you against it? Things like that. So obviously Richard Doty, he goes through all these different these documentations about like, hey, like this is what we did, and he goes into like these fighter pilots who claim they see like an alien spaceship, but where it was at from when they said they saw it to where it was at when it finally got identified it was like astronomically impossible for this thing to be there. Like it could not move that fast. It couldn't. There was nothing on the planet Earth at that time, still to this day, that I don't think could move that fast and get to that point as fast as it could. So he has all these different accounts that he declassified. Well, it's already declassified. He just talks about them, and basically brings to light like, hey, this is what really happened. Um, so the next story that I'm going to talk about is basically now. So obviously, the Air Force base that's there, the Nellis Air Force Base, was basically just a test range. Obviously, it got changed, and everyone knows it's Area 51. Like that's probably the biggest thing. So there was this family again. I would assume, I think it was about 3 or 4 years later. I think about 3 or 4 years later, this family. It's family. It's two kids. I forget if they were a boy or a girl, but it was just two kids, a wife and a husband. And basically they're going out camping for the weekend. And obviously, if you think there's nothing to fear or to be in danger, you're just gonna do your normal shit. You're not gonna think of anything crazy. You're not gonna think of all these bad things, stuff like that. So basically, they go and they're basically gonna go on a camping trip. It's a very known camping area. A lot of people go there. A lot of people go camping and stuff like that. So it's just another regular weekend for them. And basically, they go. I'm trying to hide that fucking stupid emblem. There you go. Now you can't see that it's. Yeah, I'm not gonna say it. Actually, let me throw a dip in before we get too far into this bad boy. Actually, pause. Take an admin pause real quick. Be back 30 seconds. Don't everybody just relax. Relax. Everything's okay. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Right, left, right, left. Right, left, right, left, right, left. Alright. Sorry about that, guys. Now we can throw a dip in, and then we can talk about this last part. You know what I mean? Then we'll be Gucci, and we'll be done. Then we upload it again. And that's it, guys. God, I still love that sign. Like, it's so cool. Yeah. All right. Anyways, now we're back to it. Sorry, my bad, guys. I apologize. So basically from there, so the husband, the wife, the kids, they basically wanted to go on a camp trip. In the same kind of area, the same obviously spot as where not the last encounter. There's probably hundreds more after that, but basically in kind of the same area. So they go. They go on. They go. I think they're they're probably like 5 or 6 miles out of like actual like, hey, like we're not on Area 51. This is just a public camping ground. And they basically go. The husband, he sets up. They set up camp and everything. He's got a son and stuff. Oh wait, he does have a son. Yeah, because that plays part in the end of the story. Yeah. So he basically they set up camp. They just like their normal camping shit. They got a fire. They got their tents out and stuff like that. And they say it's become evening time, and at that point in time it's like 8, 9 o'clock. Obviously at this time you don't have smartphones and stuff, so you can't be playing on your phone and shit like that all night. So you go to bed at a reasonable time. So 8 o'clock rolls around, everybody goes to sleep. The two kids sleep in the one tent, and the parents sleep in the other tent, right next to each other, pretty normal. And out of nowhere, I think it happens. It's basically it's like butt crack of dawn, and the family gets woken up by they hear voices outside the tent, and they hear the voices, and they're like, it sounds like two people. And they're like, all right, cool. Like, we're not going to worry about it. Maybe it's just other campers at that point. You're just thinking, like, it's just, like, other people who are just getting there and they want to set up camp and stuff like that. But then they start hearing radios. And you're like, what the fuck? Like, they don't have, like CB radios, like, call radios to, like, Humvees and stuff like that military people have. And they basically, after hearing that, obviously the parents get up and they go to investigate and see what's going on. And basically, two military guys approach them, two security guys who are near the base, and they basically tell the husband and wife, they're like, hey, like, we have an escaped convict, and we're gonna need you guys to leave the area because we don't feel comfortable or safe that you guys are here. So we just want you guys to pack up and just leave. And that's what the wife is saying. And obviously, you'll find out later why the wife is the one. The wife is basically the one recounting this whole story to the counterintelligence guys who are there to investigate. So basically, they tell them that, and they're like, all right, cool, we'll leave. And they get all their stuff, and they pack it all up, and they start packing it all up. And then out of nowhere, they hear the craziest shriek and loudest scream you could ever possibly hear. And they're like, what the fuck was that? Obviously, you're freaking out and stuff like that because it's not like it wasn't like a normal animal sound. It wasn't a bird sound. And then at that point, they got everything packed up. The kids are in the truck. The wife is in the passenger seat. And the husband goes to get into the driver's seat. And there's something behind him. And he turns around. And basically, he tells the wife, like, hey, get into the driver's seat and drive away. Because whatever this is, it ain't going to stop. And she's basically like, she didn't even hesitate. She gets in the driver's seat and she drives away. And the son takes a glance back and looks back and sees the most demonic, crazy looking creature that you could ever think of that is chasing them in the truck. And basically is like, hey, like, I'm coming after you because I'm killing everybody that I see. And basically from there, so they obviously get away and stuff like that. So the parent or the mom and the kids get away. They leave the dad there and basically get to the nearest police station. And basically they get to the police station. Obviously they're like, hey, like, my husband was just attacked. He's back there. He's probably like 10, 15 miles away. Like, we need to go investigate and see what the hell's going on. The county and the police station they stopped at was like, hey, that's not our jurisdiction, but I can drive you to the police station that's in that jurisdiction. And basically from there, he drops him off at the other police station. And at this point in time, obviously, the police station he takes him to basically says, hey, like, we're just going to get a hold of the military base that's close by and see if they had any, or they're the ones that told you guys to leave. So now we need to find out why they told you to leave. And basically from there, they get in contact with the military base and they're like, yeah, we had an escaped convict and this is kind of what went on. And basically, Doty gets called. He's the investigating officer at this point. And he talks to the wife and basically tells her that your husband was killed by the convict. And The government is going to hold his body and do the autopsy and everything on him before we can give him back to you and his remains. I don't know why this story makes me so nervous, but for some reason it does. I don't know, because maybe it just, probably because it really happened and that's what fucking freaks me out the most. But basically from there, they basically give her some bullshit excuse. Like, hey, your husband was killed by a convict and this is kind of what happened. Which is bullshit. Like, she's left with no answers. The kids don't have a father now, and you're just basically left with no answers. And they're like, hey, once we're done with our investigation, we will send his remains to the funeral home, and you guys can have a procession and a funeral and all that stuff. And basically your husband's dead, and he was killed by a convict. And Doty's the one who did the investigation, and this is all the story that she's telling him and stuff like that. Like, hey, this is what happened, this is what went on, and stuff like that. And then basically from there, she doesn't get any answers. They obviously go back home. Everything kind of just gets normal and stuff like that. They return his body, and the wife basically says, hey, I want an autopsy done on him. And they basically tell her, like, hey, we don't need to do an autopsy because the U.S. government had already did an autopsy on his body. And he was in pieces. He wasn't full or anything like that. He was torn to fucking shreds, this guy. And they found his body 6 miles away from the spot where they were camping at. And she still didn't have any answers. Since she's like, no, that's a fucking lie. There's no way he was 6 miles on the base. He was at the campsite with us. He told us to leave, and that's what happened. And then from there, she basically doesn't get any answers. So they don't do the autopsy and stuff like that, which I thought was bullshit, you know. Like, if my wife was killed and ripped to shreds, I would go for answers. Like, I need fucking answers. There's no way you're just going to tell me, like, hey, no, we did the autopsy and that's it. No. Like, we're going to find out what happened and what went on. Like, that's, like, I'm not settling with, hey, this is what happened. Like, no, there's no way. There's no way a person or a human being could rip somebody to shreds. There's no way. So basically, she just goes with that. They have the funeral and everything like that, and the kid grows up, and the first thing he does is join the Air Force. This kid obviously he's seeking answers, and he doesn't let it go. He just wants to know what happened. And he gets stationed. He's a security officer, and he gets stationed at Nellis Air Force Base, which is Area 51. He's basically on a night post. And he's there with a master sergeant who was basically like a private or a PFC when all this stuff happened. And he basically tells the kid that, well, he's an adult now, but he basically tells him, like, hey, this is what really happened. And he basically said an alien or an extraterrestrial beast got loose and ripped and tore the guy to shreds and then drug his body 6 miles away from where it actually happened. And the master sergeant was like, hey, like why are you asking these questions, or why are you concerned about this? And he basically tells him, like, hey, that was my dad that happened to. And the master sergeant is like, oh fuck, like, what did I just do, or what did I just tell this kid? And he's gonna, like, obviously blow the shit through the roof because he's not gonna keep quiet about this now. But that whole account is just crazy to me. Like, the fact that the government would just try and be like, hey, like, this is what happened. Nothing bad happened. Like, basically, he was just killed by a convict, and that was kind of the end of it. And it was like, what the fuck? Like, so you're saying that you guys had an alien, and you captured him, and he got out and got loose, and it just so happened that he was the first people that he ran up on was that family that was camping, and the dad gets fucking ripped to shreds and killed. And you guys basically lied to them about that. It's just very insane. And I mean, in the whole presentation and stuff like that, he talks about it, saying how he invited, like, the son to come out to the presentation, and he invited the master sergeant to come out to the presentation, but they said they weren't available for it. Yeah, of course they're not available for it, because you guys won't let them speak or talk about any of this stuff. You can say it's all fine and dandy now because, you know, the mom took a lump sum or took a settlement and didn't press charges or investigate anymore. Yeah, because you guys probably made her sign a waiver and agreement, and you paid her money and stuff like that, and you didn't make her. Like, she had no choice but to just go along with what you guys said because no one would give her answers on anything. So that was really that really just throws you for a loop right there. That whole scenario is that you guys had, and then he goes into like all the different alien races that they've come in contact with, and they're all end with like Lloyd. Like every single alien race that they've come upon ends in the name Lloyd. I don't like a Xyloid or a Xenoloid or whatever the hell it is. So basically, the government has came in contact with these 7 different races, like actual physical contact, whether it be they captured them or whether it be they crash landed on Earth and stuff like that. But basically, they came in contact with one of these things. It escaped and basically killed a person. And your guys' first thought is to let's just cover the whole thing up, which is very, very shady for me. Um, and obviously Doty's he got a lot of shade for that, and he got a lot of heat for that because to think like he just made up this scenario and this story. But you got to think, I mean, he's doing a job, and he's only allowed to disclose and talk about what he knows about at that point in time. You can't go against what people are telling you or what you should normally do. It's really, you're just going off of what somebody tells you, and it's on a need to know basis. So if you didn't need to know it, or they felt like you didn't need to know it, they're not going to talk to you about it. They're not going to tell you about it. Um, so that whole scenario and that whole topic was just, the whole thing was just shady, and in my opinion, it was just really fucked up. The way they handled the situation and the way everything went down, it really just sucks for them as a family. And I give kudos to the dad. I mean, he knew the situation, he knew the scenario, and he was just like, "Hey, babe, like get in the car and drive." And basically, he tried to fight off this fucking thing to give his family a chance or an opportunity to live, and he did. I mean, in my opinion, that's a staple of a dad right there. He took all of this and he went through all of this because he knew the situation and he understood like, hey, I know that I'm not going to make it out of it, but I want to make sure that my family makes it out of it. And to have the government just come in and be like, hey, this didn't happen is just really, it's mind-boggling for me to know that this happened and we were just like, we're okay with this. Um, so it was pretty crazy. Like to hear his account and his presentation was insane. And I'm assuming like even though he's declassified and he's not with the counterintelligence and he's not doing the investigations as far as aliens and stuff like that. Like, but with this presentation, they have like government officials there who are like, "Hey, you can't talk about this. You can't bring this up. You can. There's certain things that he wasn't able to bring up or talk about for fear that he was going to get in trouble or get killed. Probably. I mean, I don't know. Like, but it was just crazy. The whole entire account is just insane. And his name's Richard Doty. Everybody thinks he's crazy. Everybody thinks he's just a whistleblower, and he just wants to talk about this shit. And it's always after the fact. Everything's after the fact. Where he's like, hey, like this is what happened, and at the point in time, I was told this or thought this and stuff like that. And it's just really crazy that he, even trying to tell the truth, he still probably told like 3/4 of it was still probably lies. And that's the scary part, and that's the creepy part. Is you have alien life forms that have visited Earth, and your guys' initial reaction is to cover it up. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about and kind of tell you guys about. And like, I mean, for my opinion, I mean, do I think aliens are real? Yeah, of course they are, 100%. There's no way you could discount that. Obviously, from this guy's presentation, it's a crazy presentation. Like the whole thing's about an hour long, and he doesn't even go into half the stuff that he wish he could talk about. And for me, that is insane to know and to think like, hey, this is what's going on, and we're just gonna like leave it at that. And that for me is it's pretty crazy. It's cool in a sense because you can talk about it, you can speculate and put your 2 cents into it, but for the majority of it, you're thinking like, fuck, this is insane. But yeah, I mean that's what I want to talk about, guys. I hope it was entertaining. I hope you guys liked it. I'm gonna try and do some more research and talk about. I think the next on next week's episode, I might not do anything combat related. I really want to talk about. So there's this book that was published. So it's not published. It's like a 6 series book, and it's basically called the Book of Enoch. And the Book of Enoch is crazy insane because it basically takes everything you think about like religion and all that stuff, and it basically just turns it into like, hey, like demons, angels, all this stuff is real, and this is kind of the reason why the world is the way that it is. So I'm starting to read it right now. So once I get to a point where I'm like, hey, I'm comfortable with talking about this stuff, we'll go over that. But I think that's what next week's episode is going to be on, because the Book of Enoch really goes over some crazy stuff. You know, it talks about like these giant creatures and these giant man-like creatures that just went around and just fucking killed everybody and murdered everybody. So I think that's what we'll probably hit on next week for next week's episode. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I appreciate you guys stopping by. If you could, leave a like on this video. And other than that, I will catch you guys in the next one. I appreciate all you guys' time. Take care.